Hello, and welcome to another Prickly Pears project for the Palm Springs Public Library. The date is October 18th, 1986. I'm Bill Hesson, your host on this interview, or conversation, if you will, with another pioneer resident of the Palm Springs area who's agreed to share with us his memories of those early days. Our guest today, on my left, Mrs. Frances Crocker, on my right, Francis Crocker, and just beyond him, a longtime friend of Francis, Culver Nichols. It's nice of you to be with us. Culver, let's begin at the beginning, if we may, and ask you when you came to Palm Springs, and where'd you come from?
I came to Palm Springs in 1932 from Hollywood, and that my living here dates from that time, though I came as a visitor many years before that, as early as 1916.
And how about you, Francis? When did you first come to town? You remember how long ago that was?
No, I don't.
Where'd you come from?
We came down to 32.
Oh, did I came down here from Riverside, which was Rosalie's home.
Oh, I see. Well, you said you were born in Denver, Colorado.
That's right.
And grew up there. Did you go to school there too?
Yes.
And you went to college where you got a degree in electrical engineering, I think. Where did you go to college?
University of Colorado.
And that was where you got your degree.
I don't think I got a degree.
Well, you were an electrical engineer, I know that, and a very skilled engineer. So you came to Palm Springs in 1932. Why did you come here, Francis? Did someone offer you a job?
Yeah, well, that was always the thing that brought me any place, was a job.
You became involved when you came here, I think, with the electric company, didn't you?
Oh, yes. I came down here to read meters and...
So you started by reading meters?
Yes.
And then you stayed long enough to run the place.
Well, I was looking for work that paid, and I found it.
Was it the California Electric Power Company then?
Nevada, California Electric.
Oh, I see. They had the electric company here at that
Yes.
time. How big was the town then? Do you remember?
Well, that's a good question. How big was Palm Springs?
Oh, probably about 500 people.
There's no pavement, and everybody was on horseback practically.
They were.
Yes, up and down Palm Canyon.
Yes.
That's the only street that's important to talk.
And well, how many people had electric power in their houses in those days?
Well, most everybody did.
They had that much of it around town then.
Yes.
And your first job was as a meter reader? Did you do anything else for the electric company before you became manager?
Well, reading meters was part of the job.
Did you get involved in maintenance and repair for them?
Oh, yeah. I went around to read, and reading meters meant that you checked on accuracy and the billing of the amount of electricity used by the customers.
Who were some of the people whose meters you went out and looked at in those days? Remember some of your customers? Was Nellie Kaufman a customer?
Oh, yes. And the Desert Inn.
What were some of the other hotels in town then, where you would have gone to look at the meters? I'll bet you read Culver's meter.
Oh, sure.
And P.T. Stevens.
Yes.
How large was the electric company when you went to work for it? You remember about how many employees they had there?
No.
Or what it was kind of like? Where was it? Where was it located then?
Right down in the center of town. I I had a place to stay with my wife, and the office was downstairs on the first floor.
Oh. Where you lived then?
No, I lived up, Rosalie and I lived upstairs.
Oh, you were upstairs in the same place.
Yes.
And Culver beside you was saying it was on Andreas.
Well, that might have been the name of the street. I don't remember. Do you remember, Rosalie, the name of the street that we faced on?
I don't think so.
When did you become manager of the electric company, Francis?
That's a good question.
You would have been in the 30s, do you think, more or less? Culver, do you have a memory of that?
Yes, I think he was manager from day one, as far as I can tell. He was manager when I came here in 1932. Whenever we had any business with the power company, he was it.
No? For goodness sake. Francis, let's talk about the library, which has been one of your favorite things all these years.
Oh, yeah. I still love it.
I know you do. You were on the board for 41 years.
Oh, really?
A long, long time. Do you remember when the library got started, when they were trying to put a library together here? Yeah, you told me once about carrying books across town for some reason.
Do you remember
What is it?
my carrying books to the library? Or
Culver has something to say.
Yes,
there.
I want to add that I think that he was one of the few people who had the entry to the part of the library that had questionable books, books that were of dubious moral value for that era.
Is that right, Francis?
no.
All right. And I want to add that he was also for many years a member of the Board of Trustees of the Board of Education. There were 3 members of the school board, of whom Francis was one. Nellie Kaufman was one. My wife Sally Stevens Nichols was the third member of the Board of Education. That was of the Palm Springs School District. And they were a pretty good functioning board. There were times when Sally Nichols felt that Francis sort of ganged up with Nellie Kaufman to where there was any controversy in the board. So it was 2-1, and she felt that she was the minority in the board. But those times were relatively few. There was harmony throughout, and for many years Francis served the community as a member of the Board of Education.
You did a lot of things then, I guess.
Well, he's very kind. I had my nose in lots of corners. I was interested in the Board of Education and the school district, the library.
Do you remember much about the beginning of the library? Who were the people who decided to put a library together?
Well, I think probably, I know that Mrs. Kaufman was.
Nellie Kaufman?
Yeah. And was your wife?
Yes, she was involved.
Sally. And where was the first library? Was it at Wellwood Murray, where that is now?
No.
You remember that?
Yes. You want me to
Where was that?
comment? Was it Aleen's library on the corner of Palm Canyon Drive and Arenas?
Palm Canyon Marinas.
Alleen's library, where the present library is located.
I see.
No, that was at yes, Arenas.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Was that a public library or?
It was not a public supported library. It was supported by individuals. And how it got the name Alleen's Library, I don't know. And I remember the spelling of that name was Alleine''S, Alleen's Library. And it was just a little shelter, a ramada, that just had a bare covering over it to keep rain from falling in on the books.
I wonder where the books came from.
Just from local people.
Gave them to.
Yes, the local people contributed the books.
And the person that ran it was not named Eileen. It was someone else. Do you remember who that was?
I don't remember that.
Do you remember, Francis, who
Alleen.
Who would have run Alleen's library?
No, I don't.
All right.
But that's
far back.
That was actually before the public library started that.
Yes, it was.
Well, I know Francis was involved, and Sally and Nellie Coughlin in the first public library. Where was the first public library?
Well, I think it was there
Wellwood Murray?
where it is now.
Yeah.
The Wellwood Murray Memorial Library, on a site donated by the heirs of Wellwood Murray.
Would he still have been alive then, or?
No, I don't think he was still alive. No. But he had owned that corner.
I think he had a hotel there, didn't he?
I don't think so.
Or something.
Well, he did across the street. It was sort of a public thing. I mean, it was open to the public.
So you had to organize. Now, when you started the library, the city wasn't incorporated yet, was it?
No.
What did you do then? Just make it a public supported library, or did you actually incorporate it as a tax?
No, we didn't have tax money to speak of in the beginning. Not right, Nick?
Right.
Was it just getting contributions from people then?
Yes, yes,
And books too, I suppose.
yes. Anything that was related to a library.
Who ran the library for you then? Do you remember who it was?
Yes. There was a woman who was the librarian. I can't tell you her name.
Sorry.
Remember her name. She
You
would-
remember her name?
No, Francis, I'm trying, but I can't recall the lady's name. No.
That would have been long before Dorothy Bear, I guess.
Oh, I don't think so.
I don't know when Dorothy started.
I don't know.
Well, it's not important. In any event, the library did get going, and you put in a lot of years on that board, didn't you?
Yes, I did.
What were the
Can I break in here and tell you something?
Sure.
I was a librarian too, and I ran this series down at the beach. I was in charge of all the different ones, and I ran that library. Then Fred came down some way. We met at a dance at the Mission Inn, I guess it was.
Oh, that's where you met Francis?
Yes.
Oh, at the old Mission?
But I ran the library. It's a union library for a whole series of things. And I was in charge of the whole deal.
Do you remember the name of that first librarian here in Palm Springs?
In Palm Springs?
Here in town?
So I didn't have much to do with it here. You see, I came home and was married and had children, and I wasn't in the library before I came home.
Being a housewife.
Yes.
Well, Francis, let's talk about another thing that you're sort of well known for in these parts, the tramway.
Yeah.
Do you remember when you first looked up the side of that mountain and thought that maybe they could build a tramway there?
Well, the first thing was going up to the little camp up on the mountain that what was the name of the?
Up near Long Valley?
Yeah.
Would you ride horseback up there?
Oh, yeah.
Were you a good horseback rider?
Well, I don't know about good. That's I enjoyed it. And we'd go into that area from, what was the name of the little community up there?
Idlewild.
Idlewild. And we'd ride in there and look around, look down on Palm Springs, and then go home.
When did it first occur to you that there could be a faster way to get up there?
It was very difficult, and the animals that we rode weren't always amenable to our discipline.
I'm sure that's true. Who were some of the people you talked to about the tramway in the early days? After you got the idea for a tramway, did you find anybody around town who agreed with you?
Well, you're asking me a very difficult question.
Did you talk to anyone at the newspaper about it,
They
maybe?
made fun of him all the time. And I got nervous and bothered, and I got out of it. But he knew.
Your wife says they made fun of you about the tramway.
I didn't make fun of it. Other people made fun
Other
of it.
people.
So it was, you see, to get to where the tramway finally started was a horseback trip from the center of Idlewild.
Mm-hmm.
We rode horseback up there, and we'd look down on Palm Springs, and we didn't think about tramways. That came later, yes.
Before that, did you talk to Carl Barco, the editor and publisher of the Desert Sun and the Banning Record? Did you ride with him along Old Highway 99, which is now I-10, and look up toward Mount San Jacinto? And did you and Carl talk about how you'd like to be able to get up there out of the desert heat?
I don't remember that.
Do you
He talked
remember?
to everybody
I think
about
it's-
it. He kept it in mind, everybody.
Do you remember, Francis, when Earl Kaufman first got involved in it? A little bit. He was very active with you, I think, too, wasn't he? Do you remember about that, Culver?
Yes, from the very first, Francis was talking to Earl Kaufman about it, and they were both active together on it, but Francis talked to so many people that and involved many people in it, local people, especially hotel people, and they formed a committee of citizens, local citizens, to try to do something about it. And they found that they had to do a lot of correspondence and a lot of long-distance telephoning and some traveling, and there was a need for some expense money. So the local committee dug into its pockets, the members of the local committee dug into its own pockets and raised a few $100s, and then went to hotel and restaurant and business owners in the community for additional contributions until the original sum was $500 that was actually raised at the very beginning to start work on promoting the idea. And there was Earl Kaufman, who was quite actively interested in it. He liked to go up in those mountains, and he liked to ride horseback up there and hike. And So they all worked together
I see.
until finally it was Francis, by his enthusiasm and by just talking to so many people about it, he made it their dream as well as his. It became everybody's dream, all of the people that he approached. They shared his enthusiasm. And you had a very strong local committee with everyone active in doing his part. And they would approach they felt they needed support throughout the county. And they approached the editors and publishers of other newspapers. The Hemet News, for example, it was felt that their support would be critical. And John Chafee, who was the publisher and editor and publisher of the Palm Springs Limelight newspaper, went over to Hemet and had a long conversation with that editor and won his support. So that this all was because Francis had made the project come alive in our minds. All of us who were involved on the committee, this thing came alive for us because we all knew that mountain area so well, and we had all been up there either on horseback or on foot to look down on Palm Springs and down on the San Gorgonio Pass from the high elevation up there. And we, as Francis has pointed out, we all thought that there ought to be an easier and better and faster way to get from the heat of the desert to the cool mountain climb.
Francis, you must have ridden up that canyon, Chino Canyon, with Culver a lot of times. I bet the two of you spent a lot of hours up there.
Well, we were up there. I don't know whether it was Chino Canyon.
I think probably would have been, because that's where I know you thought the tramway should go originally. You've told me that in the past anyway. And of course you had to work with Culver and Sally because Sally owned the property where it originally was put. So you must have spent some time together hiking around in those mountains.
Oh, we've spent time together on a lot of things.
I'm sure you have. Well, I know one of Culver's favorite places in the world are the little hot pools up in the canyon there. Did he ever invite you to come up and jump in one of those with him?
He never had time to do anything as off the beat as that, off the beaten track for the tramway and the power company business.
Would all this have been in the 30s, Nick?
Yes, this was in the 30s and 40s, and
World War II must have interrupted the plans for the tramway.
yes, certainly.
I would imagine.
Certainly.
Well, Francis, you were, along with all the other things you found time to do, you were president of the Chamber of Commerce also.
Well, I think Nick probably was president of the Chamber of Commerce.
You were as well, but you were, I don't know whether you ever served as president,
I think you did.
but you were the most popular man or person, because we have to count the ladies. He was the most popular person in this town in that era. The Chamber of Commerce ran the town. There was no city government. We didn't have a city yet. And our governing body was the Board of Supervisors way over in Riverside, which we considered so far away that we couldn't really get there, and on urgent matters affecting us locally. So the Chamber of Commerce was the only organization there was to see that things got done. And Francis was always the top vote getter when it came time to elect the board of directors. Down through the years, his name always headed the list. He was the top.
Well, I know that
guy.
you were the first honorary life member of the Chamber of Commerce. because I was on the board when they did that. So
Do you remember that, Rosalie? I don't remember.
Is Nick pretty much right about all these things he's been telling me, Francis?
Oh, yes. One thing about Nick, he didn't ever tell a fib.
Oh, come on.
You must have been friends together when you were both very young.
Well, I couldn't claim the innocence that Nick could.
That's wonderful. I don't believe it.
I'm not sure about that. Nick was saying that one thing that got you very involved was the big flood that came in 1938, when I guess the town just about got washed away. What happened then?
I remember that, and that raised Cain with the power business.
Did it put out your electricity for a while?
Yeah.
Put you
Yeah.
out of business? How, Nick, do you remember, you said Francis was very involved.
Yes, at the height of that 1938 flood, which was the biggest flood of this century so far, both Francis and I were up the Whitewater River beyond Windy Point, checking on our facilities. I was concerned about my water aqueduct from Whitewater to Palm Springs that was being washed out, and he was concerned about his power lines into Palm Springs, the main trunk line that brought his power in, and that was being washed out up near the railroad tracks north of Windy Point. And while I was in the river and try and get back to Palm Springs.
You mentioned once you almost thought you weren't going to get out of that river.
Yeah, well, while I was doing that, he was also in the Whitewater River, which was a raging torrent, and he was in it at a power pole, watching the power pole getting washed out. And you were, Francis, you were in that flood. I don't know how deep, up to your shoulders or what, but you were in the water. And it was because we were both young men, and we were perhaps a little foolhardy. We didn't realize how easily you could lose your life in those things, as many people have done. So I recall definitely that Francis was in that flood at the same time that I was, in a slightly different place.
Do you remember that, Francis?
Yeah.
Being up to your neck in water?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You see, my office and where I lived was right over the power company office.
So you were right upstairs.
On Andreas?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I just, and downstairs was mixed up with the library.
Oh. Would that have been Eileen's library
Yeah.
at the time?
Yeah.
Maybe a little bit, I don't know.
Hmm.
I don't
What
know.
happened in the flood? Do you remember? Did that pole you were trying to protect wash away eventually? Or did it stay put?
I don't know.
Well, I guess you stayed put because you're still here.
Yeah.
But
Survivor.
we had, I was married to not only the power company, but the water, because I lived right over the, Rosalie and I lived upstairs, and that was we looked after what we could of the library and the power company all at the same time.
You kind of took care of both of them together.
Yeah.
Were there many people working for the power company then with you?
Oh, no. Probably not over 3 or 4 at the most.
Oh, really? That few? Well, who would go out and install lines and things like that? Did you do that?
Well, I supervised that.
You were part of the action there, but
Yeah.
that little small crew did that for you.
Yeah,
I see. And all the power came from outside the area then, didn't it?
Yes.
You didn't generate any here,
no.
but you were the only electric company. Do you remember when California Electric Power Company would have taken over from the Nevada California Company? When that came along? That would have been part of the growth of it, I guess.
Yes.
But after you had retired as vice president and manager of the California Electric Power Company, you weren't content to stay retired. You became the general manager for the New Desert Water Agency.
Yeah.
Why did you do that? You didn't have enough to do?
What kind of an answer do you have
Well,
to that?
I can't read your mind. You must have. I know that he always enjoyed being active, and he was the best man available. So he did it because they wanted him.
Well, I lived over
the community.
over the power company then.
The community pressured him to do those things. Now, the California Electric Power Company was the successor to Nevada California Electric, and which was in turn the successor to the Southern Sierras Power Company, wasn't it, Francis?
Yeah.
And I think when you were first here, you were the Southern Sierras Power Company.
That's right.
Which later became the Nevada California Electric by mergers mostly, but it was all the same. The same power company, just bigger and bigger all the time.
I see.
And he was the local manager, but he was also the district manager for the whole area. That was I don't know how large his district was. Maybe.
From Banning.
Do you remember how big the district was, Francis?
Well, it started in Banning and it all the way down to Palm Springs.
Through the whole valley.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where did you buy your electricity in those days, in the earliest days?
From the central distribution in San Bernardino. That was where the main plant was located.
Would that have been Edison then, or
No.
or did your company generate it itself?
It came from his company's facilities in the High Sierras, up around Bishop and Lone Pine and that eastern slope of the High Sierras.
So that was why they called it Sierra Electric Power.
Southern Sierras.
Southern Sierras.
Southern Sierras.
Nevada California Electric Corporation. And
I remember you took me on a trip once up in the Sierras,
did I?
along with a lot of other people you invited from town here to see the generating plants up there. So that electricity came a long way to get down to Palm Springs.
Yeah.
Palm Springs must have been one of the smallest parts of that company in those days.
It was.
But-
It was.
Did it grow very fast?
No, I don't think it grew very fast. It grew consistently.
Of course, each time somebody new would come to town, they'd have to have electric service. The hotels in those days must probably have been your biggest users of electricity.
That's right. And Rosalie and I lived over the power company office, which was on the first floor.
I see. What were some of the reasons that you'd lose power in those days?
Well, that's a good question.
Earthquakes?
Oh, earthquakes, people running into your pole lines.
That must have happened a lot, I guess.
Yeah.
Which way did the poles come into town?
Well, they came in from Whitewater.
I see. Did they just come across the desert,
Yes.
or did they come down a road?
Well, they usually followed close to the road.
It'd have to be a road so you could repair them
That's right.
and so on. And those were exciting times. What'd you do for fun in those days? Where did you take Rosalie when you wanted to have a little fun?
Church.
Church? Did you ever go dancing? She said she met you at the Mission Inn in Riverside.
That's right.
And you must have been dancing or at a party or something.
Yeah.
Did you like to dance?
Yes. With her.
Oh, okay. You're being careful.
That was wartime, and we had wonderful dances, and I met him at one of these dances.
I see. Were there places here in Palm Springs where you could go to dance?
Well, that was later.
In those days?
Yes, we were-
After you moved down here?
Yeah, well, Palm Springs was still small.
Very small, but very nice. The people were all charming people.
Aside from Nick, who were some of your best friends then?
Uh,
The Kaufmans, I guess.
Oh, yes,
the Hicks, the Pennies,
yes.
Hope Garlic, Hope and Isabel Garlic, who operated the Oasis Hotel,
They were the first operators of the Oasis, I think, weren't
and Dorothy and Phil Boyd
Mhm.
were here in those early years, and they owned and operated Deepwell Ranch with Frank and Melba Bennett, and Phil Boyd later became the mayor of Palm Springs when it was newly incorporated.
So there were things to do to have a good time. And I imagine you and your friends got together quite often then, didn't you?
Oh, yes.
We would have a little picnic occasionally and go out into the canyons, go up Palm Canyon or out into the desert and have a picnic with some of these people. And we would also go to each other's homes and just visit.
Did the hotels offer entertainment in those days? Very much? Like music for dancing or little groups or orchestras?
I think El Mirador was the leader in that sort of thing. The El Mirador Hotel had a band and a dance floor and dancing, dinner dancing. And the day life was more important than the night life in those years. Swimming in the swimming pools, and sunning, and walking, and horseback riding. All of these outdoor activities were important.
Did you ever go up, either of you that you remember, to go swimming in Tockwitz Canyon in the pool under the waterfall up there?
I did.
Nick did. He liked to swim more than you did, I think, Francis.
Well, I think he had more free time than I did.
Oh, okay. Well, he was in real estate.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I was pretty well tied to the power company.
Right.
Did that take a lot of time?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
All kinds of things happened.
What were some of the things you had to do then?
Oh, people ran into your power poles and knocked them down. And
Did you have to do the billing and the books and everything too?
yeah,
You had to send out all the bills?
yeah.
So make sure did people usually pay their bills?
Well, what would you say to that, Rosalie?
What did you say?
Oh, I just asked them if people usually paid their electric bills or if we had to go chase them.
Oh, I don't know.
Well, I had to chase them.
Yeah.
You had to chase them?
There was a depression on for a while, and sometimes it wasn't easy to keep up the payments current, you know, and we'd get a little behind, and he wasn't very tough. He was, but we knew we had to get the money there, or we wouldn't have any electricity.
Were the hot summers hard on the electric company? Did they cause power failures very often, the summer heat?
No, I don't think so.
Transformers burning out or anything?
No.
There wasn't any air conditioning in those days.
Oh, so people didn't use that much electricity.
No.
What'd you do to keep cool in the summer? How did you do that?
Well, we went up to my family for the weekends sometimes,
Oh.
Riverside, and made a break.
You did what people do now, you got out of town a little bit. Well, let's go back to the tramway and talk about that a little more, Francis. When you began to develop plans for building it, L.E. Dixon Company was very important, weren't they?
Yeah.
What was their role in that? Do you remember that?
Yes, they were the general contractors who actually built the whole project, coordinated it, and built it.
Of course, that didn't come along until the 50s.
That came,
Actually, the 60s.
actually, the early 60s. It was completed early in when? 60, 61, 62?
Yeah.
So that it was, but it had a whole lot of people and companies had to be brought together to build it. And Francis was the spark plug and the coordinator of all of this activity, getting things done, getting people together to see to it that that this dream ultimately would be realized. His dream became their dream, and it became the dream of each one, the general contractor and the rest of us, those of us who worked with we had to work with the state legislature because we had to get legislation through the state legislature that would authorize the building of the project as a revenue bond financed project. And so he and Earl Kaufman arranged with Henry Lockwood, a local attorney, to go to Sacramento and to shepherd these bills through the state legislature. He had to be there for the committee hearings. He had to talk to the legislators privately and individually, so he had the committee here, headed by Francis and Earl, had their extension as a lobbyist in Sacramento in the person of Henry Lockwood, who not only did all of that, but also prepared the legislation, prepared the everything, all the legal matters connected with the project. He patterned those bills on the legislation that authorized the San Francisco-Oakland Bay Bridge, which was a revenue bond financed bridge, and still is, at San Francisco Bay. And so this was patterned after that legislation legally, and all of this was arranged by the committees and the authorities. By this time it was the authority employing Lockwood for that purpose, and Lockwood later became the counsel for the Tramway Authority when the tramway was finally built. And Henry Lockwood is still available in Pasadena. He's retired, of course, and
he lives in Pasadena.
yes, and the whole project took so many years. The committee, our citizens committee, must have functioned for 20 years without any official standing. Just a committee organized by these local men, Crocker and Kaufman and myself and others, who raised money when we could, that was needed for studies. And at one point, Francis reminds me that we raised something like $2,400 for a special study, a feasibility study and that was is a small amount now, but at that time it was difficult. And all of these things, Francis was right in there all the time, working.
It must have been awfully hard to keep that dream alive of the tramway for so long, when it was so hard to get anything done. It must have been awfully difficult to keep that going.
They had been in contact in discussions with various builders of other tramways in other places, and there was only one other one actually in the United States, and that was in Franconia Notch, New Hampshire. And so they tried to use that experience as a model, but it wasn't really applicable. But more important appeared to be the tramways in Europe. And there were German tramways and German tramway builders, and there were Italians building tramways in Italy, and Austrians building tramways, but most important were the Swiss. The Swiss, being an up and down country, was really the best, most active and highly developed tramway culture.
Nick, you must have been a little torn when the proposals began to near reality, because I know how much you and Sally loved that canyon. And you knew the canyon would have to be the access to the Valley Station, which would mean a lot of people. How did you feel about that?
Well, we had these feelings, just as many people in Palm Springs felt. What will this do to our community? How will it affect our lives and the lives of future citizens of Palm Springs? And will it bring too much outside traffic, for instance, and that sort of thing? So yes, we did have those misgivings. And for instance, it was important to me that the access road, the entrance road, should not go through a residential community, because I felt that the traffic would be a burden on the fine homes that exist then existed and still do in Little Tuscany, for example. And so I insisted that it not go through there, although that was the way we were going to get to make the surveys and get to the site. We had to drive through Little Tuscany because it was the only way.
There were no other roads then.
There wasn't any other way to go, and the road up into Chino Canyon, the old road, went right up through Little Tuscany, and it went right through our property, there were construction problems of groundwater. There was an awful lot of groundwater up in the canyon in what some people call the Cienega, and it's called a Cienega for good reason, because it does have a lot of rising water, and a lot of the ground is soaked and marshy. And so I pointed out to the engineers that would be no place for a road. They would have difficulty building and maintaining a road with groundwater coming up through it. And so I said, look, there's a dry place right there that's perfectly good. And I said, that's where you're going to want to have your road. And they did. That's what they selected. The present route of the access road is not only avoids the residential area of Little Tuscany and below, but it also avoids getting into trouble with construction through the wet ground up in the upper canyon. And so yes, we were concerned, and so were all of the others. The people all didn't want to create a project that was going to be in any way harmful to the environment. They didn't want to.
That's always been a primary
They didn't
concern
want
of yours.
to bring a lot of people into the mountain area who would destroy it, who would hurt it. And that is, I think, has been accomplished very well. I think the tramway is a great success in that aspect of it. That environmentally, it has not injured the environment, in my opinion.
Francis, I'm told that you picked the upper site for the tramway, and they built it. Finally, after all the engineering, they put it almost exactly where you said it should be, back in the 30s. Is that right? You remember that?
Well, I think it's, I don't know. I'd want Nick's agreement to.
Little input.
That's the truth. That's the truth.
I understand it's within 100 feet of where you said it
Francis
should
never
be.
tells a fib.
That they did.
You're very kind to me, Nick.
Nick, do you know anything else we ought to talk to Francis about while we have this
Well, there must be
opportunity?
many things, but I think you've covered such a lot that maybe you'll have to do another one. But he was always so active when he talks about not having time for certain things. That's because he had time for the essential things. He was always so active in the library and in the school district and the Chamber of Commerce and everything else, everything that was going on and happening here in Palm Springs, and of course the tramway, and he certainly is the father of the tramway. That he didn't stop. He just didn't stop to.
He never slowed down.
He didn't stop to go swimming in the creek.
Well, you're very kind.
Except when he was caught in the flood.
Oh, yes, I'd forgotten.
That slowed you down a little bit. Francis, thank you for having us in your home to do this, hold this conversation. And
Well, what makes it is my friend Nick.
he's been a friend for a long time and a good friend.
Well, and he doesn't mess around with the facts. He deals only with the facts.
I've noticed that about him. Our thanks to Francis and Rosalie Crocker for having us as guests in their home for this conversation, and to Culver Nichols for joining us to give a little input and some thoughts along the way about those early days in Palm Springs.